What is going on, everyone? So in this week's video, we're going to take an in-depth look at the Intrepid 8x10 Mark II. Now back in March, I created a first look video about this camera, sort of talked about some of the differences between the first and the second generation. And in the time since producing that video, I've had the opportunity to use this on a backpacking trip and kind of get a feel for the camera. Now, as a matter of full disclosure, I did receive this camera in exchange for some video work that I did for Intrepid Camera, and that was late last year. But they have no clue that I'm producing this video, and all the thoughts, opinions, and everything in this video are my own. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Intrepid 8x10 Mark II. So let's start the review by talking about some of the changes between the first and second generation 8x10 cameras from Intrepid Camera. Second generation is going to have an all metal base as opposed to a wood base on the first generation. The metal base allows this to be a much more rigid camera, especially if you're extending that lens quite a ways out. If you're using, like this is a 450mm lens here, and if you extend it out and kind of grab the front, there isn't any play. So I'm very, very impressed with how rigid it is. Part of this is due to the new focusing mechanism. So the first generation had some knobs right here in the front. Second generation, you have your focusing knob right here on the back. The front here extends out on these metal rails, and it's very, very smooth. So I'm definitely really appreciative of the new design that they're using for that. We have a reinforced front standard here, and so you can get away with a heavier lens than you could on the first generation. I still like to keep the lenses pretty light. For me, that's the whole purpose of this camera, but it's definitely nice the way that this right here has been reinforced. If you look at the bellows, it is a new material. So it is a kind of a rubberized material, a bit more rigid, and it seems like it'll be much better if you're ever shooting in the rain or anything else along those lines. If we go around to the back of the camera, so we have a new mechanism to hold the film holders in there. Instead of using the shot cord, which I never had any problems with, this has a more traditional leaf spring design. This does definitely apply more tension to that film holder when you have it in there. So hopefully that will reduce any chances of light leaks or anything else along those lines. We also have a new way of changing the orientation of the back here. So it's a little bit more traditional. You flip off these safeties. The back is going to separate like this. There are some magnets that are in there. And then this is going to drop in place just like that. The magnets will grab, and then you reset these latches. And the camera can be stored either vertical or horizontal, unlike the first generation that could only be stored vertical. So I definitely appreciate the fact that this can be stored either way. And then if we look at the front of the camera here, we have dual knobs up front, which is excellent. So the outside knobs are going to control tilt, and then the inside knobs are going to be for rise and fall. And then this knob right here, this is going to be a captive knob. This right here is what holds the front here down to the focusing bed. On the previous generation, that could come out, and if you lose it, then you're kind of out of luck. Overall, the camera gained 1 pound, but along with that comes a lot more rigidity and a lot more precision, and so I definitely think it's worth it. So this is what the camera looks like when it's all folded down. There's the base of the camera there. There it is from the side, and then there it is the back with the ground glass. So I took off the quick release plate because I wanted to show you the overall design of the bottom of the camera. So we have this rectangular plate right here, which is raised up from the bottom, and then we have these screws right here that attach it to the bottom of the camera. These screws are not completely flush with this plate right here, and this sort of comes into play if you're mounting a quick release plate. So this is a quick release plate that I like using on a lot of the cameras. It's the Kessler quick stand. And it has these wings on it, which works out really well because on most cameras it helps to sort of distribute that side-to-side weight very well. In this case, it's not quite as effective just because of the placement of those screws. When you attach this, it's going to look a little something like this. And the top actually works pretty well. You actually get pretty good support side to side, but those bottom wings just kind of hang off the end there, so you don't get quite as much support from that. So in a perfect world, I'd love to see that these screws right here are flush with this plate. And in an even more perfect world, I'd love to see the bottom of the camera overall completely flush, so you have even better ability to attach a quick release plate that's going to carry that side-to-side load. Also love to see these threads here a little further apart. The reason being that when you're attaching the plate, those screws kind of get really close to each other. It still works fine, but if they're a little further apart, that'd work even better. I'd also like to see this metal right here even thicker, because the entirety of the threads are contained within this piece of metal right here. So if that was even deeper back in there, I think that'd be even stronger. So let's talk a little bit about the focus mechanism. And this is an area where I'm really happy with the design of the camera. So you have this knob right here, you're gonna turn to focus. And it's really well designed for sort of the fine-tune adjustments. If you're just kind of trying to work that focus a little bit, I find myself adjusting a little bit more like this as opposed to like this. If you do want to really rack that focus out really far, if you're using a really long lens, it does take a bit of effort to turn this. But I find that if you put a little pressure right on the back there, it kind of gives you a little assist, which kind of speeds it up. I do wish that there was a way to speed up that process a little bit, but it's not really a big deal because it is a really nice and very solid mechanism. If I spin this around here, I do have this focus out a little bit right here, and you'll see that even if I push really hard on the front or pull on it or wiggle it, there's no play whatsoever. So it's an incredibly strong mechanism, and I'm really happy with that, especially when using a really long lens. I also want to show you something else here. So if I go ahead and drop this down here, you'll see that I put some marks right here as reference points for 90 degrees. I did that using a combination square. Basically, I was able to line up the front standard perfectly 90 degrees. I took a pen and just drew a line across there. I did that for each of those holes. The front actually lines up perfectly with the front standard just like that. But this way you have a really good reference point for knowing that this is exactly 90 degrees, which is something that's really important when setting up the camera. So I'd highly recommend doing that because there aren't any marks on it straight from the factory, but it's really easy to do that. And if we take a look here in the front standard, take the lens off, take a look inside there. In a perfect world, I'd love to see this have some really flat black paint on it just to reduce any chance of any light sneaking in there. I have not had any issues with that whatsoever, but I always like to see it nice and black in there, just as a way of minimizing anything in case the tolerances of your lens board isn't quite right or something else along those lines. But I'm incredibly happy with the focus mechanism on this camera. It's really strong and really easy to work with. So let's talk about front standard movements. So we have these dual knobs here, which is a great addition from the first generation that only had single knobs. And the single knobs in the first generation, if you had them a little backed out too far, they had a tendency to just come out all the way. So this gives us more precision. It's a lot easier to work with. The outside knobs are going to be for adjusting your front tilt, just like that, and then really easy to lock it in place. It's worth mentioning there are not any detents at the 90-degree position, but you can visually line it up based on the way that there are some lines here on the side. You can kind of see if that's at 90 degrees, though I'd love to have some detents in there, and that way you can just kind of feel it click into place. The inside knobs here, this is for rise and fall. So this allows us to move this up and down, and it's fairly well squared up if you have this flush with the top, just like that. Just keep in mind that when you have these loose, you do have a little bit of play like this. So it's usually gonna be best if you go ahead and adjust your rise and fall first, and then you do your front tilt. Otherwise, you might inadvertently change your front tilt just a little bit. But I'm really happy with the way that this works. Really smooth controls, the knobs are captive. So this is definitely a great design change from the first generation. So let's talk a little bit about rear standard movements as well as inserting and removing film holders. So on the back of the camera here, we have these two knobs and then these two knobs. If I loosen all four of those knobs, we have the ability to adjust the rear tilt. This is something that's really important if you're going to be setting up a photo where you want to kind of tweak the perspective or things along those lines. I do wish it was a little easier to see when this was perfectly set at 90 degrees. You have to kind of eyeball it a little bit. But it would be nice if there's some way of making sure that that was set at 90 degrees. When it comes to the back of the camera here, to open up the ground glass area to insert a film holder, we have two tabs right here to kind of grip and to open up. Now it's worth mentioning that the leaf springs on this camera are really strong, which means it's going to hold the film holder really securely, but it also means it takes a little bit more effort to pop this open. I do wish that the back material here was a little bit thicker because I feel like when I'm gripping from the edge here, I'm kind of tweaking this back a little bit, which makes me a little bit nervous seeing that there is some glass right in there. But it'd be nice if there was maybe somewhere kind of in the middle to lift up in addition to the edges. And also if there's cut at a little bit more of a 45-degree angle back here to give you the ability to kind of reach in there a little bit easier. This right here is a film holder from Chamonix. So I'm gonna show you how to go ahead and put that in there. So I'm gonna pop this open a little bit like that. I'm gonna take the film holder, I'm gonna drop it in place, just like so. I'm gonna slide it in, lift it up a little bit to get beyond the light trap, and then it'll give me a nice little click to drop in place. I find that with this camera, it's important to give one last little push, like that. You heard a little click that it made. It kind of settles the film holder in there a little bit better. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I find that it takes that last little bit and then it's really, really solid. When it comes to removing the film holders, it's a little bit different than other cameras I've worked with. Typically I'd reach right here or over here, but you really can't reach those areas very well because it's really flush here at the end. If there is a bit of a 45-degree cut, or if there was something here in the middle to kind of grab on, make it a little bit easier. But with this camera, all you're gonna do is take the film holder, pull it back a little bit, and then use that to kind of leverage open the back, just like so. So it's a little bit different than other cameras, but I will say that when you shoot vertical, it's gonna be a little bit more difficult because you're gonna hold the camera just a little bit differently. So you can go ahead and switch this to vertical, just like so, and drop this into place. There's magnets that will grip that there. And same thing, we're gonna open this up. We're gonna take our film holder and we're gonna insert it down in there like so. Drop it in place. And then I always like to kind of give it a little bit of an assist to get beyond the light trap. Get a nice little click here, just like that. And just like before, I'm gonna push on the back and just settle it a little bit, just to make sure it's fully seated there. Now, when it comes time to remove this film holder, it's a little bit different because we're gonna hold the camera a little bit differently than we were before. I find that I can't really pull this out quite the same way. You have to kind of take your finger, kind of put it back behind it, kind of get it started, and then pull it out. But I do wish that there was a little better way to grip right here to be able to get your fingers in there to pull it out of there. So it takes a little bit of a different method. It can be a little awkward at first, but just like with any camera, once you get used to it, it becomes pretty much second nature. But I definitely find it's important to kind of push on the back a little bit, just to make sure that film holder is fully seated. So let's wrap up this review by talking about lens compatibility and pricing and some things along those lines. The website shows that this camera is compatible with lenses from 180mm up to 600mm. Just for kicks, I took a Schneider 120mm wide angle lens, put it on the camera and see what would happen. So I did have the ability to focus to infinity, but what you will have happen is the bed right here will kind of get in the way. And I had the camera set up vertically as kind of a worst case scenario. And I tried to do a drop bed focus, which is where you take the whole camera, you kind of angle it downward, you straighten out the front and rear standards, so now you're kind of shooting over the top of the bed. But what happens there is I can no longer get the standards close enough to focus to infinity. So maybe for horizontal it might work if you do a drop bed, but certainly for vertical it doesn't work out very well. I also tried my Nikkor 150mm SW lens, and that lens worked just fine on the camera. I don't even think I had to do any drop bed focusing, but I stopped down and I see no evidence of the bed in the foreground. Now it might be because that lens has a really big front element. That element kind of sticks out a little bit, so that kind of helps it kind of get over the obstacle of, not having the bed show up in the image. So my 150 did work on there. That being said, I definitely like to keep the lenses on the small side. So I have 3 lenses I'm really using on this camera. I have a Fujinon 240mm A, I have a Fujinon 300mm C, and this right here is my Fujinon 450mm C. So when the lenses are really nice and small and lightweight, they're going to be even more stable on here than if you had a really big heavy lens. But for me, the whole point of having a lightweight camera is to keep the whole kit small, so I definitely recommend keeping the lenses really lightweight as well. When it comes to price, this camera is priced at 480 pounds, which is about $600 US. That is incredibly inexpensive. If you're to go and buy a 8x10 camera, and it doesn't even have to be a lightweight camera, those might be even more, but you're gonna be spending like $3,000, if not more, on the camera. And the really lightweight ones are gonna be even more than that. So you're getting a tremendous value with the Intrepid 8x10. And with all the changes that they've done, the dual knobs, the new focusing setup, the metal base, this camera is one that I'm completely confident in. And I was really happy using it on my backpacking trip. You're gonna see me using this camera more often when I wanna keep my kit really nice and lightweight. So I have no hesitation recommending this camera. It's not a perfect camera, but no camera is. And all the little things to work with, just like, putting the lines on the base there, really easy stuff to work with, but it's a very solid, lightweight camera. I definitely do recommend it. But I want to thank everyone for watching. We'll see you around next week.